All right, so yeah, so the second session here is to look at science filmmaking in more detail. How do we go about and do that? Why is it important? And how you can even implement it, even if you're not well versed on how to do it. I'm going to kind of try to take you through the equipment you might need and the steps you can do to even create short little videos with what you have already. All right, so let's talk a little bit here about the science of storytelling as well. So if we have this many words that get consumed by the average US citizen every day, then the point is to keep it short, right? Having a great title to grab readers' attention as it applies to any kind of science storytelling that you're doing. And so this is why headlines work, right? Something that captures our attention, but it's still something based in truth. And so this comes from advertising. So if the majority of consumers want brands to make ads that feel like a story, do it, right? Deliver the content that's linear, expresses a clear narrative that people will respond to. Again, giving people what they want. And so if you were part of the exercise in the first session, where we talked about knowing who your target audience is, then it really helps to know your why and call to action to kind of have this linear delivery. And your brain processes images much faster than words. So again, showing, not telling, images for more compelling content. So it's kind of like when you have your plate of food, how you want the majority to be vegetables and some to be protein. It's kind of the same thing, having slides be the majority of some kind of image and then minimal text on there unless absolutely needed. And if it is, then you can just animate things bit by bit as well. All right, so we talked about this in the last session too. So here's the physical book of this, Why Science Needs Story. Randy Olson, being a scientist turned science communicator turned science filmmaker. So you're the expert at science, right? You know that story best, but how do we tell the story is kind of where we can get hung up. Communication, though, is an important job of the modern scientist. We see, for example, when applying for grants these days, that we have to have some kind of outreach component there or some ways of disseminating our information and what that looks like. So there's the ABT method that was mentioned in the previous section. And this is the momentum of so you have a problem first. And what about it? So what's the momentum there? But there's some kind of conflict here. Therefore, what's the resolution? And so this book kind of goes more into detail if you're interested in learning more about why science needs story, as it states there. Then they talk more about that ABT method in there. And so when we look at how storytelling affects the brain, the story will activate parts in the brain that allows the listener to turn the story into their own ideas and experiences, right? And we know this from when we were just reading stories that don't have pictures or some kind of fictional stories or nonfiction. We start to create those images in our own brains. We try to turn that story into their own ideas and experience. So having people reflect on this is really important. And listeners will not only experience a similar brain activity, as we talked about the fMRI studies in the last session, but they're also going to mirror the speaker. So kind of being on that same brain wavelength, if you will. And then the brain does release dopamine into the system. Okay, so when it experiences some kind of emotionally charged event. And so that makes it easier to remember and also with greater accuracy. As far as the actual activity in the brain, there's two different areas that get activated when it comes to the motor cortex and to speech. And so a well-told story can also engage many additional areas, right? And so that's what you're trying to do, is you're really trying to engage with someone's emotion and hopefully compelling them to some kind of action as a result of your storytelling. Now, so the stages of filmmaking, we're going to break this up into pre-production, and then production, and then post-production. So the pre-production phase is storyboarding. I don't always use this kind of format, but so what you're doing here is you're talking and you're setting up your whole film into boxes. The one in the upper left-hand corner is your first shot. And then what happens then, and then the last shot, how does your story end? And so folks in Hollywood still do this kind of thing. It might be more digital now. Back in the day, they would be drawing out kind of in detail what they expect to have happen. Because again, it kind of gives you this flow to follow. So storyboarding helps because if you're going out to shoot film, you want to know what shots to get, right? And so if you kind of have this idea of your plan, then it makes it a lot easier then to actually go get the shots you want versus piecing something together at the end and not having things really work well or edit well together. Okay, so it's really important to kind of be thinking about what you want to be getting beforehand. So this is a great webpage, themeasureofthings.com. So in the last session, we talked about the power of analogy, right? And so I just wanted to mention this page here. So when you're scripting out a film, you want it to be interesting and informative and trying to incorporate some kinds of analogies. So I made this short little film about the future of fire when I talked about how many millions of acres have been burnt. And then I used the analogy of like, well, how does this compare to the size of the Grand Canyon? It's 6 times the size of the Grand Canyon is how much burns annually. Kind of get people thinking about something they may be familiar with and what that might look like. And so again, this is thinking about your audience too. When you're going to be using analogies in film, think about like if it's widely distributed, that might be tougher, right? But if you know it's going to have distribution in the US, maybe use more US based analogies. So I put in an example here. So in this web page, it does have ads, so you gotta have to work around that. But you can go ahead and put in like 400 cubic meters and click search. And then it'll give you a few ideas of like, it's about 1/5 as big as an Olympic swimming pool, or 40 times as big as a concrete mixer truck. So it gives you all sorts of different options that you can work with based on that number. So again, if your research is using a lot of numbers that a lot of people can't really relate to, this is one way to try to translate that into what's called social math, which is something they can relate to. So be thinking about that when you're scripting as well. And oftentimes when I'm scripting, I'm writing the narrative, right? The voiceover part that I'm going to be doing, and also saying when an interview is going to come in. And I do a lot of the research up front here, oftentimes using this webpage to see, oh, what kinds of analogies can I make for some of these points to see if they connect better. And then when you're thinking about the interview, you definitely have to think about who you want to interview and the questions you're going to ask. So definitely considering diversity, equality, and inclusion, okay, when you're picking your subject experts. And then asking targeted or tight questions. You don't want to be asking yes, no questions typically, because then you're not going to get anything really on camera that's usable. And oftentimes it's nice to give your interviewee those questions beforehand too, so they can start formulating in their mind the kind of response they'll want to give and not be put on the spot. And then there'll be a lot of takes. This is an image from an expedition to the Andes back in January, where my husband and another man here, Eduardo, were being interviewed on site. Multiple cameras and different types of mics. We'll talk about that kind of stuff. And so being able to figure out how many people you have, what kinds of equipment you have, and how you're going to film audio. Because that's the hardest thing if you're going to be filming someone outdoors with a kind of interview, which oftentimes looks good with the lighting. Those are things to be considering as well, which we'll talk about. All right, so the kinds of basic equipment. Okay, so if you have a DSLR, that's great to use. Just making sure you have those large SD cards or memory cards, because film takes up a lot of that. A GoPro, because you have a GoPro, like if you know that you're going to be out on a hike or doing something active that you want to film and incorporate, GoPros are great for that. They're resilient. But oftentimes all I do is carry around the smartphone, right? The iPhone capabilities now are just unbelievable what you can shoot with. So there's an iPhone right there being shot to do a live stream, for example, with a small little tripod. And you can get away with doing so much with just that, right? So don't think you have to be going out and buying all this equipment. If you already have it, go ahead and use it. But honestly, with a smartphone, you can do so much. Oftentimes external hard drives are really important because, again, the files that get generated are huge. One video that's about 3-4 minutes can be at high resolution, 0.5 gigabyte, right? And so, or if you're working at an institution or you have access to servers, and you can, and there's enough space on there, you can also back it up there. But an external hard drive is a really good idea when it comes to this. And then a laptop or a PC with some kind of video editing software on it. So those who have MacBooks, you get iMovie, that comes for free. And then if your institution has access to other suites, like the Adobe suite, like we do here at NC CASC, then you also have Adobe Premiere, which is great for video editing. It's got a steep learning curve, so you definitely would have to take some kind of workshop to figure out how to use, for example, that particular software. But iMovie is one of the simplest, and I'll show a bit here of what you can do for editing videos pretty quickly and efficiently and still making them look pretty pro. And then extras. So a tripod, right? So oftentimes, like a lot of the shots I do are handheld if I'm going to be just like going and panning around. But if you're doing an interview, you definitely want to have a tripod just for the stabilization. A gimbal, if you've heard of that, is just something that can stabilize the phone. So if you're walking and hiking, instead of it shaking a lot, it will actually stabilize. So again, these are just extras if you need these kinds of things, because you can sometimes just even set up a phone against a book or a rock or something to film. So again, you don't need to go crazy with the budget for this stuff. Lights and reflectors, sometimes they're very helpful. This situation here where we were filming in the Arctic up in Svalbard, it was just shoulder season where we were only getting 3 to 4 hours of daylight, and it was cloudy most of those days. So a GoPro actually has an attachment of a light there that you can buy and add, or some kind of material that reflects light. But flat light is actually your friend. So you don't want like super bright light, because then people will be squinting. You don't want to put someone under a tree if you're going to interview, because there's going to be shadows and distractions. But flat light actually works pretty well. Having the person face, into the sun, that light, but not into like direct sunlight. So again, just see how it looks on the camera and do some test shots too. And there's ways that you can actually adjust exposures on your smartphone for that as well. Microphone is probably the most important thing. Again, like the audience can forgive you for video quality that isn't the greatest, but not for audio. It's just super distracting. Right? And so we'll talk a little bit about mics here. There's two, the lapel and the boom or the shotgun. So the lapel are the ones that you've seen get attached to someone's clothing. That gives you really good sound because it's right there and you don't get all the outside noise if you're filming outdoors. The iPhones have excellent mics, but you can also attach this boom, kind of the furry shotgun ones that you've seen can actually are good for directional sound. Now, when I'm doing voiceovers with this iPhone, I was doing it like this a lot, and I was getting a lot of those sounds. And I learned to hold it horizontal and like this off to the side and at a certain distance each time in order to get the best sound. So you can use that technique just with the iPhone, something called voice memos, which I think is actually built into the iPhone, and just record it like that, airdrop it onto your computer, and you have your great audio. So that's more so for voiceovers. But for interviews, you're going to want to be thinking about these types of microphones. So I'm not sure if we have enough participants to do this into breakout rooms, but maybe let's just have some fun. Let's just try to do it. So instead of a storyboard about all the different shots here, I just think it's kind of a fun exercise here here's your scenario. Okay, you've got these 3 people in these suits holding something in a field. What's the story? Okay, so it's kind of a fun exercise to go, let's try the breakout rooms, or let me see, who do we have here?
I'm kind of wondering if we just stay together. There's only...
How many are there? 6. Oh yeah, you're right. Okay.
And
let me... There we go. Now I can finally move around I always wanted to catch up also on the chat here really quick to see.
There is a question about when you're using a lot of electrical equipment in remote areas, what is the best way to keep it continuously charged? Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and so in the Andes where we're shooting the interview here, we had guys with they're coming to film documentaries, big cameras, big batteries. So because it was only a few day expedition, they actually were able to just get away with bringing lots of batteries and not having to recharge anything. But honestly, like solar panels, there's these Goal Zero solar panels that I've used when I'm out on expedition for multiple weeks. And so it's a solar panel that folds out, and then it charges up a separate battery that has usually USB connectors, and then you can top off your phone. The thing to preserve battery if you're shooting mostly with smartphones is to put it in airplane mode, right? Don't have it go searching for signal when you're in a remote region. But Goal Zero, here, I'll write it. Yeah, the problem with the GoPro, which are like great for lots of shots, is that the batteries go really quickly and take a long time to charge. So Goal Zero setups have big solar panels with different wattages depending on your needs, and different batteries also, and sizes of batteries. So you'd have to actually look to see what you're capable of carrying, like if you're just going backpacking. But that's the best way for charging up things. And the smartphones last a lot longer. So, a great question. All right, let's do this. Let's throw out some ideas here, either in the chat. I'm gonna have the chat pulled up here. Yeah, let's just do it in chat, because if people are shy and don't want to speak up. What is, so we're not, let's just change the prompt here. What is the story? What is going on? Okay. We don't have to write out a film kind of scripting, just what is it? Time to be creative. That we don't know. What are they protecting or protecting themselves from? So this is the part of the story that you can make up. Like 3 people have emerged from the pandemic, have discovered a laptop in the field of something there, juniper, I don't know, and now have to decide how to save the world. You know, something like that. Just kind of fun. Just throw out a few little fun things here. This works better in a bigger group, but oh well. Yeah, exactly. Agricultural monitoring involving pesticides, not very exciting. Exactly. But how can you make it exciting? That's the point, actually. So thanks, Hannah. It's like, so sometimes you can have something perceived. Here we go. Agriculture in a bubble on Mars. Perfect. I like it. Sometimes you might think that how the heck do I actually share my science about something that might not be as interesting to other people? Well, you can make it into a fun kind of sci-fi story or open it up like that, but then you get into a serious documentary style. So the thing is, and you'll probably have heard about this before, is the hook, right? You definitely want people to like be like, if you open up a video with this scene, you're like, what? And you say, in a world in 2030, blah, 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 you know, like just hook people to watch the video. And then you kind of get into some of the science and the facts there. Because there's an interesting thing you can do on YouTube and Facebook, depending on where you post these things, is that you can see metrics and you can see where people drop off. And that can actually help you craft better videos, because people got bored after a minute. Okay, maybe I want to shorten the message. Or they watched it all the way through. Great. Well, there we go. I like it, Emma. Growing food in the midst of a zombie outbreak. Nice. So yeah, the point here is to think about something interesting that would pique someone's interest in something that might not be interesting otherwise, maybe something agricultural, and have people be like, I want to see what this is about, right? You can solve a mystery, for example, which is what this scenario would be. Yes, what are they protecting themselves from? In a dramatic voice. And finding someone who could do voiceovers too, so I like to do the voiceovers, but like I don't have a voiceover voice, and I just do it. But I have a few contacts actually who are really good at voice work. So if you have friends or you have contacts, or you can reach out if you're doing something bigger scale for science film. You can definitely hire them out for that as well. I saw a really great video during this AGU Voices for Science where this lady hired this voice actor, and it was wonderful the way it was just like a cartoon, but just really well done in that dramatic voice. Great. Well, thanks for sharing some of those ideas. All right, let's go into some more of the stages. Okay, so when it comes to camera work, so there's something called the rule of thirds. And so if you have your camera like this, and you kind of split it up into these 9 boxes, things that are typically right in the center can be really distracting. You might want to use those shots, but the eye really is drawn to these thirds. So what does that look like? It's like this, right? So putting someone off center like that, the silhouette makes a great shot. And there's this one too with landscape. So we're using the right hand thirds over this one with the person, and then with the landscape, we're using it on the left side. But notice how these things line up. Just aesthetically, it just works. People like that. When you're doing interviews, offsetting someone like that works really well. But if there's no rule of thirds, like in this shot, for example, no problem, right? Because it's framed nicely. So you have this nice silhouette there in the foreground of this rock, and then you have these clouds surrounding it. And you're like, wow, I have like this window into this beautiful peak. So you don't always have to use the rule of thirds. It's the preferred thing when you're filming interviews and when you're trying to have some imagery. But in cases like this, it's better not to, right? Because that might be a bit too distracting. You really want to draw the eye there. All right. So angles and perspectives are also really important. So I was a mentor for this program called Lens on Climate Change a few years ago, run by CU Boulder as the science mentor, and we had a filmmaker with us. So just activate these. If you have two cameras, you can consider close and wide angle shots for interviews. You've probably seen people when they're interviewing, you'll see them like this, and then all of a sudden you'll see them much closer and back. So having multiple cameras in different angles can also keep a person engaged with the content. This image on the right hand side was these students were making a climate change film on cows. Okay? And so they bought these little toy cows, and they did stop action. So, you know, I don't think they realized how long of a process that was going to be, but it was cool to actually see like them using stop action, and you see that camera pointing straight down. And then I took this shot here at a farm that we were working on just to see the pigs, and this pig went right into the camera. But sometimes that's pretty cool too. So considering what's called these perspective shots, over the shoulder, like following someone, down at the ground level looking at, or something coming right into the camera. It's kind of cool. So yeah, you can play around with different kinds of shots as well, just to keep things interesting. And then bringing the viewer in as far as perspectives from the ground. This is a shot I took on an ice cap in Iceland, just with the iPhone. Let's see if it actually that gives people a sense of like being there in that storm and the wind blowing. I don't know if you heard the sound. I think I forgot to optimize. Did I? Did it work, Jane? Okay.
Yeah, we were able to hear it. Makes me feel cold.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's evoking something. So again, I was down just down really close there and just letting the camera shoot and see what it would see. So sometimes you can do cool shots like that to bring a viewer in. And then of course there's something called that golden light, right? So this is in the morning. Jane has some golden light on her right now. So morning and evening shots. You don't always, again, have to do that, always having the golden light, but it's just sometimes works really nicely. And then the new iPhones, the ones that have the 3 lenses here, maybe the 2 ones, I'm not sure, but I know this one does. It allows you to do the wide angle shots. And so you see the kind of the soft lighting here of a trail, right? But then what the wide angle does is it kind of smears those clouds. And so it makes you feel like you're being drawn down the path, right? So you can also experiment with wide angle shots and what that looks like for bringing that viewer in. And then there's another little video clip about the golden light. So this is also from Iceland in a place called the Blue Lagoon. It was pretty risky to take this phone without any kind of protection into a case in the water. So I quickly shot the film and then put the phone away. But this was early morning as the sun was rising. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this light is gorgeous. So, so this is using that beautiful light, bringing that viewer in because you feel like, hey, I'm in this lagoon here also. So seeing how you can use perspective shots and lighting to your advantage. And if I were to actually be using this clip in a film, I would cut out that sound, just mute the sound and just kind of have some other voiceover or music there. So you can, I'll show you just a bit here about the kinds of editing things that can be done. All right, so again, when it comes to interviews, so when you're the person, so typically you want a team of two, at least two people, someone with a camera. If you can't, you just set up a camera on a tripod and then you go a little bit to the side of the camera. You want to position yourself next to the camera and ask the interviewee to look at you when speaking. So if they're looking straight into the camera like this, it's a little disconcerting, right? It might work in some cases. If someone's like talking directly, I want you to do this, looking straight into the camera works. But when it comes to interviews, it's always better, again, to have that rule of thirds up to the side and then to have them look at you, but not all the way so that they're turned this way also. So right next to the camera there. So here's an example of an interview happening with one of these bigger cameras. There's the shotgun mic, you see there, and the guy is standing next to the camera person and asking questions there. So multiple camera angles also help if you have more than one camera. So you might not always, so you just have to, or you could move around also. But again, emphasizing that good audio is key, right? And so you might, even if you don't have the best video, if you have good audio, that's all you need to go off of. All right, so the narration part there when recording voiceovers. So smartphone apps like voice memos, that comes automatically, I believe, on the iPhone. And again, for those just joining in now, when you're doing these voiceovers, don't speak right into the microphone here of an iPhone, but just off to the side and a little bit of a height here, and you get really nice sounding audio, even with just a smartphone. There are other attachments like you see here that work with the iPhones. Shure is a really good company that does really good microphones. I think these run for about $100 and they attach right here and they get you more of that directional sound. So get holding phone on its side for the best audio and consider using the microphone if needed. I have not had a need for that with voiceovers, but outdoors, filming interviews, I've noticed it picks up all the sound, multi-directional, right, which can be really distracting. So if you're going to be filming interviews outside, this kind of mic is definitely helpful. All right, and then there's something called B-roll. So A-roll is like your primary filming. B-roll is kind of filler. If someone's giving an interview and then you want to show what they're speaking about, that's your B-roll. Like someone's talking about fire and all of a sudden there's a time lapse of a fire going on. So there's multiple ways to do this too. Let's see if this activates. But for that same program, Lens on Climate Change, these students really wanted to do whiteboard animations, but they wanted to draw on the whiteboard. So we did a hyperlapse on a smartphone and then they drew. So really sped up. And so their story, there's a voiceover going on during this about basically drought and about the corn. All right, so they wanted to do this and we incorporated this into the little film, which is just a really neat way you can use B-roll. So you can define it as this supplementary footage to enhance that main story. It could be these hand-drawn whiteboard animations, and Jane can put in the chat. Doodly is another one where you can actually, a web page where you can ask or have these things made for you if you have specific ideas. There's many out there, but that's just one that I know of. If this applies, simple experiment. You're doing an experiment, having a little tripod that this one stands on and angling it correctly, that could be really useful. And then illustrating concepts with props. There's a prop, or if you have any kind of little, I've seen people make stop motion with just cardboard cutouts of things, or with little creatures, stuffed animals. I mean, there's so many different things you can do that you can use to fill in, because sometimes you just don't have footage for what you need, right? And so it doesn't mean that you can't still fill in with some B-roll. And imagery is one way you can also fill in if you don't have enough video, and we'll talk about that here shortly. So after you gather all these clips, this is when you enter the phase of editing everything, right? This is where there's classes that get taught on all of this, and workshops that you can take. So this is obviously just a very quick kind of look into editing, but it starts with importing clips into whatever video editing software media library you have, whether it's iMovie or Adobe Premiere or other suites that are out there. Final Cut Pro is another one. And so the important thing is to be organized, giving names to and folders on your desktop, because it's very easy to get a lot of footage and then try to piece where everything is. So one of the first steps I do if I've done a lot of work on the smartphone is to airdrop into a folder, whatever the file name happens to be, and then give it a specific name, like BRoll grasslands, BRoll fire. So then that kind of draws my eye when I'm starting to edit. And it's as simple as dragging and dropping clips onto the timeline. But then what you do with it, that's the hard part here, with transitions and timings and sound, because you'll see the green boxes with the yellow are audio. And so you can see that the audio is really high. So you have to kind of adjust audio to also not be overwhelming, because if you also have music in the background and things are competing. So audio, there's separate software for doing that as well. But you can do a lot of it within even these video editing software suites. And then trimming lengths of clips, right? So sometimes you might not want the entire clip. You can mute sections, and then you can add B-roll on top of A-roll. And so if you have an interview, like on your timeline, you can actually literally just put a clip on top and have that B-roll be added on. And then you can also add titles and words as needed if someone's being interviewed, putting their name and title, credits, not having them flash by really quickly, so actually making them readable. And then transitioning between scenes as well is really important. Sometimes just blending things versus just like making them really go very sharply can be very distracting to the eye. So again, having multiple people looking at the finished product really helps to see if it works well and what needs to be edited. Again, there are courses you can take specifically on this kind of stuff, but if you're interested in doing quick stuff on iMovie, it's as simple as this: importing clips, dragging and dropping them, trimming, just stacking images on top of each other and adding. You can see there, it says my media, audio and video, titles, backgrounds, and transitions. And so this is just a visualization of what I mean about stacking the B-roll. So imagine you have an interview and you don't want sentences 2 and 3, so you need to cut, you need to trim that clip. Or if someone's just going and you want to cut that out, or there's a lot of motion and it's distracting, then you can put B-roll on top. You can slice it in a way where it just looks really smooth and it sounds really smooth, even though it may not have been in the original take. Okay, so those are just some of those editing tricks to make that work. And then there's something called Ken Burns effect. For those who've worked in iMovie will know about this. Is anytime you import any kind of image, just like a snapshot, into the editing software, the Ken Burns effect is kind of giving motion to something that doesn't have it, right? So it's a still image, but you can still give it a sense of motion, where you tell at the starting point of the clip at 0 seconds, start on the left side here, and by 5 seconds, we will have panned over to this tree. So it's one image, but you're only looking at a certain section, so it looks like video. Okay, and so that Ken Burns effect is due to Ken Burns, who kind of perfected this technique with documentaries. So it's a really neat way. Again, if you don't have enough video footage, don't fret, because you might have really good imagery that you can add this sense of motion to. And then also thinking about, we talked about this in the last session, about these emotional anchors. So thinking about what scenes are going to be powerful, and including what you say. And if you haven't or don't follow on Twitter, NC_CASC, you can see YouTube links to some of the videos that have just been posted on our page that use some of these techniques to get some ideas. Something else to think about in post-production is evoking curiosity. So this is a picture from the Marshall Fire, that winter wildfire that happened here. And you're like, huh, what is this? Like, I know a fire happened and I can see, you know, the trees kind of turning yellow brown there, but why is a trampoline on its side and all twisted and contorted? So you can start with a question, even when you're making or scripting a film. And the reason that's like that is because of the really high winds and the gusts that pick things up. It's just unbelievable to imagine that happening. Here's the aftermath. So evoking curiosity, be thinking about that with some of the imagery you might have. And then threading a question. This is a personal one I made here, but do penguins have knees? That's something you obviously think about, but it's kind of a cute little video. And you thread this question throughout, and then you finally answer it near the end. So that keeps people watching the entire way, right? But you also don't want to prolong it. So kind of the sweet spot that we found with most viewership is between 2 to 3 minutes. And so people's attention is kind of peaked and they really want to know by the end. Right? So in addition to audio, oftentimes when you watch movies or any kinds of shows, you always hear the music in the background, right? And so searching for open source royalty-free use is most important. I used Artlist, and Jane will put a link in the chat there. And so you do have to subscribe to it. I think there's limited amounts for free, but I subscribe to it just because I use it so much. But this is all royalty-free. So one of the problems with anything that you're going to produce is if you use commercially produced music, you don't have permission for that, copyright infringement, right? And so finding something like this is really useful because music is really powerful. Depending on what scene, what's happening, do you want dramatic music or do you want more kind of carefree music that actually can really help drive the story in addition to your narration? And then when it comes to dissemination and publicity of it, so YouTube is a great tool. TikTok I don't have experience with, but I learned about that with AGU's Voices for Science, that is becoming more and more popular for short videos. I think a few scientists that I know have used it have gotten pretty good results with followings, because again, you're forced to like do 30-second clips to really pique someone's interest. So you really have to think about what the message is and what the cool footage is for it. And there's also Instagram and Facebook. And because of algorithms and how they work, it's always better to put a photo with something, if you're making a post, something science or related, some kind of beautiful photo that will drive people. The links, if you start to put links in Facebook, for example, the algorithm actually moves it way down in people's news feeds. So oftentimes people don't see it. And if they don't see your post, then it defeats the purpose. So you always should put photos with any kind of text that you're going to have. Maps, if they're appropriate, are really useful. Again, just screenshots. And I say photos are greater than maps, are greater than data charts, because people, I've noticed, like when they see charts or some kind of maps, something there, they just scroll right by. But if they see a really pretty photo, you draw them in, and then you talk, whatever science you want to write about, and then you can add in the other stuff, the maps and the data charts and all that stuff. You can definitely put in all those facts, but in a more interesting way after you've already hooked someone. And this is my last slide because I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. So this is a great resource that I've been using, and you can get either the physical book. I have only the ebook version, but Ryan wrote Science Videos, a user's manual for scientific communication. So it goes into a lot more detail about these kinds of techniques. If you're really interested in the technical aspects of it, what it takes this is a great resource to have on hand as well for all your editing and production needs. So hopefully that quick intro was helpful, and I'm happy to take any questions. Let me see also. Trying to stop the share, and I have no control of my desktop right now.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat.
Okay, once
yet.
There we go. Okay, now I'm free. Thanks for putting all those links also. All right, let me see. What do you think are some important strategies for communicating specifically about climate science? That may be unique compared to other disciplines. Let me say specifically one more time. Nice, thanks. Yeah, this is a great question because climate science has unfortunately been so politicized, right? And so again, I think going back to the previous lecture and techniques about really the storytelling aspect is going to be really important. If you know, for example, that you're speaking with farmers about it, don't just come in with like, oh, we're doing all this wrong. It's like let's approach it from the story, like what's important to these people who are going to be suffering from climate change. So that's how I would kind of approach it. It's like, or did you know that by the year 2030, blah blah blah, like some kind of things that get people kind of thinking about, oh wow, I'm going to actually be affected by this personally, because climate change has been so it's not like an immediate threat. If you've seen Don't Look Up, that movie, mockumentary, they're talking about a meteorite impact, imminent threat coming, and people are still not believing it. Like, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to make any progress on climate change, which is so slow? That's the challenge of the day, right? So I think the best thing you can do is really meet people where they're at and tell them why it's important to them, not in a way that's accusatory or like you've been doing all this wrong, but like here's an opportunity. Like when it comes to our crops, for example, which are disappearing due to drought and this and that, here's an opportunity. What about renewable energy? What about putting solar panels on your farmhouses, and it'll help your crops? Kind of approaching it from the perspective of whoever you're talking to when it comes to specific actions to take. But yeah, we face a really uphill battle, Hannah, because of just how politicized it's become. But I think like specific calls to action towards those targeted audiences is our best approach. And also not leading with the bad news, right? Because then people just turn off immediately, right? We always want to offer some kind of hope and strategy to get there. Excellent question though. And it's something we all are, should be thinking about. And I think those infographics from the previous session is going to be a good way also. One of the things that I've done when I've taught intro to climate change classes at a freshman college level in the past was having them create billboards about something that's really special to them that's going to change due to climate change, like skiing, right? So these kids came up with a picture of themselves on the grass, and they're like, great. There's a little thought bubble that says, well, great, now what? And so it's like, whoa, that's really powerful. Like, we don't want this kind of future. It's humorous, all right, but it's also conveying like, hey, this is a real problem. Let's come about like addressing this. Or beer, chocolate, wine, all these things are going to change due to climate changes. So if you can have these kinds of ads or billboards that say something in a humorous way about like this stuff disappearing, maybe people will be like, wait, what? How's, like, let's do something. So yeah, I think it's the more visual, the more impactful. And then let me put up, I think that's the slide I want to be left up here. And then from previous, yeah, let's put this one up here too. Keeping these things in mind, just kind of simplifying things about who your target audience is, what do you want to do as far as your message and how give people something tangible also. So, easier said than done, I know. And hopefully you guys have some good tools on hand now, some good resources, books, other things to help along. Feel free to reach out. One of these things I'm doing with Voices for Science through the NC CASC will be putting together these kind of brown bag seminars that go into more depth about specific topics as well.
Do you think as part of like the resources after this, you might be able to send like a list of just like all of the books and websites and everything that we talked about today? Just a lot that we went through, and
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So we made a little cheat sheet with all the links, so we'll share that one. Yeah,
perfect.
I'll give you yep, definitely. Yeah, I know it's a lot to cram into these 2 hours, and because I've taken days-long workshops on this kind of stuff, but hopefully it's giving you some ideas, you know, about the kind of like tangible things you can be doing and thinking about. And yeah, we're happy to share those resources.
And eventually we'll have a cleaned up version of the video so you can refer back to, and then I guess we'll add a few other things that came from the chat to that cheat sheet as well of links.
Yes. Great. If there aren't any other questions, have a great Earth Day, and thanks for everything you're doing for our planet as well.